Thank you, Faiza, for the introduction, and hello, everybody. It's really nice to be on this side of the virtual room today and be the presenter rather than the host. So good to see some familiar faces as well as I think some new names. So welcome to those of you who haven't been on a webinar with us before. Um, I started to get interested in this topic a while ago. The nature of our work, as I'm sure the same is for many of you, is very international. So I was used to working with people who I never met by email, conference call, and so on. But then, probably about 10 years ago, I found myself as part of a virtual project team, a product development team. Very small team, but working with people in London, but also a couple of colleagues in the States, and then a couple in Italy as well. And although we actually knew each other a little bit and we were in the field, so in theory we knew how we should and shouldn't run the team, we found it wasn't as easy as we thought it was going to be. And while we thought we had good relationships, there were tensions and frustrations. Often our expectations weren't the same. We had different priorities and we didn't get the work done as quickly as we perhaps would have done if we'd been sat around a table together. And then, starting to work more and more with clients in the virtual space, I realized that we were far from alone. And often the very big corporations were having similar problems. They saw the benefits of working in virtual global teams, but they also became very aware of some of the frustrations. So while it's not all bad news, there are definitely some challenges that we need to address when we're building particularly our virtual teams. And really what I'd like to focus on today in the short time we have together is the initiation of the team. I think if we get strong foundations in place, it means that when conflict does arise and there are potential challenges further down the line, we've got those building blocks very firm in place from the start, and that can help us to manage the challenges that come up later on the journey that we take together. But before we do that, I'd just like to find out a little bit more about all of you and where in the world you are. But perhaps before I ask you to do something for me, I wonder if you notice anything rather strange about the map of the world that you can hopefully see on your computer screens. Perhaps I'll ask a question where you can put your hand up. You could put your hand up if this map looks completely normal to you. Okay, so some people have said yes. Those of you that didn't put your hand up, what seems strange about this map, perhaps? Perhaps in the chat function you could just write a comment in terms of what's of us at least. Perhaps from those of you who are here in Europe, you might find it slightly strange. Thank you, Bayat. So yeah, the Pacific Ocean is in the center, and certainly from a Eurocentric perspective, we're used to seeing Europe in the middle of the map. For me, seeing my little country right in the left-hand corner, that seems still a little bit strange for me. And I think that's one of the challenges when we work across cultures, we work in global teams, is that the world isn't always the way we think it is, and our perspective on a situation is very different from everyone else's, and we have to reevaluate, perhaps clean our cultural lenses so that we can see the world through other people's eyes as well as through our own. So bearing that in mind, I'd like you to do something for me. I'd like you just to grab the pencil or the marker in the left. You should have a column on the left hand side with the various annotation tools. I would just like you to put a cross, or your initials if you prefer, where in the world you are. And if you could also mark on your location what time it is for you. So mark where you are, and then if you could just write down the time it is for you right now. For us here in the UK, it's 2 p.m. So it's 3 p.m. I think for some people in mainland Europe. 9 o'clock. Is that must be 9 o'clock in the morning in the States? And then 3 p.m. we've had 10 p.m. over in Asia. Great. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, is that? What time is it in Brazil? I'm not quite sure. 12 o'clock perhaps. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. So you can see already one of the very practical challenges of working in virtual teams is when do we get together? We've chosen to run these webinars at 2 p.m. UK time because it seems like a good time that will capture people both in the Americas and in Asia. But I appreciate that for some people it's already after normal working hours. So if you are late in the office, thank you very much for joining. Interesting. I think if you look at the literature, look at some of the research that's been done in terms of virtual teams, the statistics suggest that actually more than 50% of these teams, they fail, i.e. they don't meet their own objectives or they don't meet their client objectives. And what I find almost more interesting is the fact that even when virtual teams do meet their objectives on a personal level, they don't want to work together again. So the relationship part of the piece has not gone well. But I think it's also important to remember that it's not all bad news. And actually, when all the conditions are right, when you've built those, that's a really good question, Francesco. And I have to confess, I don't know the answer, but I think the percentage of virtual teams that fail is much higher. And I was actually reading something today that even when people are within a building but on different floors within the same office, they're more likely to fail. But let me see if I can find that number for you, and then I can send it round with the follow-up email. But yeah, when they do work well, they do have those building blocks in place, then actually virtual teams can be more effective. And another stat for you, I read recently that 66% of large multinational companies do work in virtual teams. So I think there must be something beneficial. There must be some compelling reason why people do decide to use virtual teams in their structure, in their working practices. I'm going to ask you to do something now. I'm going to just launch a poll for you. Just bear with me 2 seconds. Now you should see some questions come up. And the main question is, which of these situations are true for you? Now you can tick as many or as few of these statements as you feel are appropriate for you. If you I'll just give you a couple more seconds just to finish that, and then we'll have a look at the answers. Lovely, thank you. So interesting. I think most of us, by the looks of things, about 68, so nearly 75% of people have some contacts who they work with virtually, who they never or rarely see. Looks like only 1 or 2 people maybe actually manage a global team at the moment, but maybe it's something you're looking at in the future. Home workers, there's a few people that, yes, they manage people who are working remotely. And then we can see a few of you are part of virtual teams. Some people work from home, which has its own quite unique challenges, I think. And some of you have random colleagues perhaps that you work with on a remote basis. So a real range of experiences in the room, which is good to see. So thank you for doing that. And now I'm just going to ask you to do another thing. We're talking about the challenges, but I think we also have to remember there are benefits as well as challenges. And I'd like you just to have a think in a moment about what some of those challenges could be, but also some of the benefits. So you should now see a whiteboard. So I'd like you just again to take a moment and write down here for me, either on the left for the challenges or on the right for the benefits, some of your ideas in terms of what might come up when you're working, particularly in a global virtual team, but even if it's a national global team or a home working situation, what are some of those challenges that you might have experienced yourself or have heard other colleagues talking about, or perhaps have read about in some of the management literature that's out there? Lovely. And it's interesting to see there's a lot more challenges at the moment than there are benefits. I know some of you perhaps are struggling with your handwriting on the whiteboard. Do bear in mind if you grab the T, you can type as well as freestyle handwriting, but whichever you prefer is fine. Lovely. Well, I think some of you might still be writing, but let's just start to have a bit of a look. So cultures are coming up, cultures and language, which can cause, we'll talk about this later, but particularly on the cultural side, sort of different expectations, different ways of working, different communication styles, and so on. A few people have mentioned time differences, so a very practical challenge, but I think, I've certainly heard often people, perhaps not based in head office, complain that the time of the virtual meeting is always at a time that suits the head office, and they're perhaps not aware that for the guys out in other locations that they're either having to come in very, very early or work very late. What else have we got? So there's no face-to-face contact. It's very hard to build that personal relationship, to create those water cooler moments, if you like, without that face time that we have when we work in the same office. Excuse me. Another real advantage of the benefits is that you don't get to have me breathe my germs all over you today, as I have got a bit of a sore throat and a cold. So you're lucky today not to be in the same room as me. Technology can be a real challenge if we're not trained, if we don't know what we're doing when it comes to the setup, the IT that we're using. Who's the group leader? What are the roles? What are the responsibilities? That personal connection. Let's have a look on the positive side and the benefits. So it's more cost effective, absolutely. There's a positive in diversity. So having people from different backgrounds, different cultures will give different views, different approaches perhaps to problem solving, for example, the know-how, the expertise. You can have more contact because you have more time. Now that's interesting, and I'm not sure exactly what that person meant, but I think there's certainly something to be said for being more focused. So perhaps there's less small talk, there's less on the relationship side, which means you can focus more on the task, which I think can be a toss-up. It can be a benefit, but it can also be a challenge. So thank you for that. There's some really nice ideas there. Let me just go back to my slide. There we are. So let me just share with you some of our ideas, but I think, to be honest, most of them came up in the exercise. But yep, time zones we mentioned, technology. there's something about local constraints, and I think as a team manager, it's important that you know what's going on in your team members' local environment, whether it's a severe weather occurrence, whether there's political things going on, but knowing what's actually happening in country is important. The team can be quite fragmented. We often talk about subgroups within a virtual team, and I think that can be more challenging than actually having each team member in a different location. You can develop a sense of cliquiness if, we have two or three members that are seated together while others perhaps aren't. Communication, we could talk for several hours about the challenges of virtual communication, the language. Feeling lonely, and I think this is particularly true for home workers. We are generally, at least most of us, are social beings. We like to have that personal interaction, and if we're working physically on our own, that can be challenging. I think particularly for those of us who are more inclined towards an extrovert temperament, it's challenging to be working in isolation. And then on the positive time, I think the great thing about virtual teams is you can, particularly with project teams, you can harness the best people at the best time wherever they are in the world. And you may have heard this expression before, to follow the sun. So if you're a customer-facing, customer service-oriented team, you know that there will be someone available 24/7 to attend to your customer's need. As one part of the team goes to sleep, the next part is getting up and starting work, so there's a constant coverage. It can be cost saving, and there's a flexibility for some people, knowing that they don't need to relocate, for example, when there's a merger, and they can stay in their original location or work from home is a big bonus, and that can improve your employee retention numbers. And I think someone mentioned this before, the focus to really get down to the task in hand and not be distracted by what's going on in the other office, or phone ringing for other people can be a big benefit. And yeah, the benefits of diversity. I think there's been so much research now suggesting that when we have a team with different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, different ways of behaving, if we can harness that difference and make it work for us, then the sum of the parts of the team can be much greater than a monocultural team. So that really is by way of an introduction, but what we're really going to focus on for the rest of the session this afternoon is these building bricks. What do we need to do at the start of our virtual team life cycle, if you like, to make sure that we have a successful journey and we deliver our objectives either to our organization or to our clients? And I think really there are 5 core things that we've identified that I'd like to talk to you about briefly this afternoon. So the first is the selection. Who are the people that are going to form our team? How do we develop them? If they don't have all the skills, perhaps what can we do to train them, to develop them, both in terms of their skills, but also how do we develop them as a team, as a cohesive unit working together? How do we foster those positive relationships, those water cooler moments, if you like, that enable people to work well together, to deal with conflict as and when it comes up, and work together, engaged towards the team goals? And I guess part of those relationships is, how do we build trust when we don't see people? How do we know as a manager that we are trusted and also that we can trust our team? We can't see what they're doing. We can't lean over their shoulder. We don't want to micromanage. So how can we really have that trust that our team members are doing what we expect? But also, I think equally important here is, how do we know that individual team members also trust each other and trust us as a manager? And we'll talk about this in a few minutes. And I think these kind of people areas are really crucial to building an effective virtual team. But without the right processes, the right protocols at the center of everything we do, we're not going to have a team that fills its objective. So it's getting the people side right, but also having very clear, transparent processes so that everyone knows what they're doing and how they do it and where they're going. And we will also talk about this in a moment. So I'm going to take you briefly through each of these areas, starting with team selection. Now, obviously, we don't always have the luxury of building a team fresh from scratch. Sometimes we inherit an existing team, or we're given the right people with the right technical skills, or it's just a question of who's available for the next 3 months when the project needs to be delivered. And I think there is a danger almost when we are selecting the right people for our team that we choose people like us, people who are similar to us, that we know, who work like we do, who see the world in the same way as we do. And that's great because we understand each other. We can perhaps use shortcuts to get work done. We know what the other people are thinking, what their expectations are going to be. But I think we're missing a trick if we do this all the time. And we've spoken already about the benefits of diversity and having people that will approach a problem in a different way, who will look at the creative process differently. So I think from my perspective, it's very important that we do bring in different backgrounds, different working styles when we're building our virtual global teams. Obviously, we want the technical skills to be right. You know, if we're working on an IT development team, our team members have to have those IT skills. But actually, the soft skills are equally important and often neglected. So when we are selecting new team members, if we can, we need to hire for the soft as well as the technical skills. And obviously, if we're hiring people in other parts of the world, on the other side of the globe, the interview becomes a lot more challenging. If we can interview face to face, then obviously that's advantageous. But there are platforms like this, and I'm sure all of you use Skype, so that we can do a face to face interview. It might not be in the same room, but we really need to replicate the interview process as closely as we can. And there are a number of assessment tools as well that we can use to look at some of these soft skills, and I'll talk about those a little bit in a moment. So I've just shown you a few here. I'm not sure, is anyone familiar with any of these tools? Probably most of you know Myers-Briggs, which looks at our personal preferences when working, when responding to different situations. Do you want to put your hand up if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs? So quite a few of you are by the look of things. Belbin is the one that really looks at team roles. You may have seen that if you work in something that really looks at how we interact with different people and how we respond to different situations within a team. So that's a nice one. I can send information around on some of these tools as well. That's an interesting comment, Brendan. Trompenhaars hates Myers-Briggs. I'd be interested to know why. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Myers-Briggs because I think it's very complex in the language it uses. So if we are using English as a working language, the language of Myers-Briggs can be quite opaque, quite difficult to navigate. And it's also very much telling you how you are rather than how you can develop. And the last tool there on the screen is something called the International Profiler, which we use here at the London School of International Communication. And that really looks at where you place your energy and attention when you're working internationally, but it gives you pointers in terms of how you can develop. So if you have a weak spot, you're able to develop it rather than it being kind of a status quo. He thinks it polarizes answers rather than using continuum-based values. Fair point, yes. And I think that's another big advantage of the International Profiler. You're on a scale between 1 and 100, and the language of the International Profiler talks a lot about how you can move the dot. So if you do have a low score on certain competencies, you work on how you move that dot further up the line. So I mentioned the soft skills required. So perhaps again, I can ask you in a second. I'm just going to share, let's share a clean whiteboard. Here we go. And perhaps if you grab the pen again, or if you click on the T for the text, think about what are some of the softer skills that we need to be effective when we're working virtually. What kind of competencies, what skills, what personality traits even do we need to be effective in a virtual team or in a virtual environment, working from home even? Things are starting to come through. So clear communication, absolutely. Are you transparent in what you're saying? Is it clear to everyone in the team what your message is? Anything else? In that case, let me go back to my slides and I can share some of my examples with you. Just bear with me 2 seconds. Here we go. So let me just share some of the examples that we had. So there's a need to be self-motivated, to be able to work autonomously. So I'm just realizing that the chat seems to have disappeared. So just bear with me a second. Haha. It's ironic that in our session on working virtually, we have the technical issues, but we're back. We're back in action. So yeah, we need to be self-motivated. Someone mentioned we need clarity of communication. This is a big one, I think, being comfortable with conflict, being okay to address it, not being too worried about voicing conflict and breaking the harmony. We ran a separate webinar on this, which some of you may have attended a couple of months ago. So you need to be focused on the task as well. You need to be able to get down to business and work on the task in hand, but at the same time to collaborate with other team members. Thank you. Someone's added being a good planner. Yes, you need to be able to plan your day without perhaps the structure of lots of meetings and collaborations in a face-to-face context. Culturally sensitive, we will talk about this in a moment, but being aware of other cultural norms and behaviors, different communication styles, then things like flexibility, trust, we'll talk about. And of course, the technology, not strictly a soft skill, but we need to be able to use the technology. A little bit ironic, this one. Let's move on and talk about the development side. We might not have the perfect team at the start, which ticks all the boxes in terms of technical skills, strength of character to work autonomously, the soft skills we need, the communication. So as a team manager, we really need to put in some time and effort in developing those skills. And I think more than ever at the beginning of the journey. So having a structured team launch, if you can have some face-to-face time at the beginning, then that's, I think, a luxury for some organizations, but important to build the relationships, set the ground rules, because I think there is that danger that sometimes when you have remote workers, they're out of sight, so they're out of mind. And there's a danger that people feel neglected and not necessarily have the time and investment in them that people in the office might have in terms of training and so on. Team building, we hear so much about team building activities these days, and obviously it's great when you can get together and you can build a bridge out of spaghetti or go on a cookery lesson or get covered in mud doing an obstacle course. But there are some really nice things that we can do online as well in terms of using this kind of technology, sharing images, doing some of these online tools and questionnaires so that we get to know each other a little bit better. And I think a really great technique is to put people in pairs so that there's a buddy system and people in different parts of the world are mentoring or buddying other team members. So it's not just coming from you as the manager, but people are supporting each other across the team as well. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about the relationship side of things. I'm not sure if you've seen this graph before. It's used quite a bit in intercultural training. It looks very complicated, but the message is actually quite simple. The message here is saying that we need to invest time up front in building relationships for our teams to produce the results later on. You can see at the start of the team journey, it looks as though the blue line, the team that focus on the relationship as well as the task, output's not great. It's pretty low. It's pretty slow because they're spending a lot of time chatting, getting to know each other, perhaps sharing some personal details about each other, perhaps having that face-to-face time. Whereas the orange line, the very task-focused team, they get off to a roaring start. They're quick off the starting block. Their productivity is way up high. But give it, I don't know, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and the position swaps. Those relationship people who were spending time getting to know each other, perhaps having social interaction as well as work-related conversations, they're storming ahead now and their productivity soars, whereas you can see the very task-focused teams lose the productivity. Perhaps conflict starts to raise its head, and because the relationships aren't there, the team doesn't quite know how to deal with challenge, with conflict. Frustrations come into play and the productivity falls away. So interesting really to see the need. Of course you need to be task focused, but if you neglect the relationships, it's going to cause problems later on in the team's lifespan. And I think one of the definitions of virtual teams is that they're divided by these three things. So we saw at the beginning the different time zones that we're all in. We're divided by time. It's morning for some of us, afternoon for others, and late in the afternoon for some of you. Obviously, we're divided by space. Nobody is sitting here in the room with me. Many of you aren't even in the same city or the same country as I am. We're divided by geography as well. And perhaps from our perspective, most noticeably, we're divided by culture. So we have different expectations in terms of what a manager is, how we communicate, how we approach a task, and this can cause frustration. So I'd like just to do a little exercise with you, which you'll be relieved to hear doesn't involve any drawing or annotating. It just involves a little bit of reflection. I'd like you to think about somebody you work with who you don't see very often, if at all. So they might work in another office, they might be in another country, they might be a client if not a colleague. I just want you to think about that person and see if you know the answers to these questions about this person. So in terms of time, do you know whether they're an early bird? Do they like to get into the office early and get ahead with their day? Or are they a night owl? Are they someone that really likes to work late into the evening? Perhaps they get into the office late, but they take work home with them after the working day. What about their lunchtime preferences? It might seem a strange thing to ask. Why do you need to know what they eat for lunch? But are they someone, perhaps they're in a culture where it's important to take an hour and go and sit in the canteen? Or are they very much a sandwich at the desk kind of person at school or they're caring for an elderly relative, for an example, and they need that flexibility to deal with some of their personal commitments. And what about space? Can you visualize where that person sits? Can you see in your mind's eye what their desk looks like? Are they in their own office? Are they working in their spare bedroom at home? Or are they in a large shared office with a lot of noise, a lot of interruptions and congestion going on? Because this can affect the way they work and the way they interact with you. And finally, their cultural orientations. Now, this can be an interpersonal thing as well as a national culture thing. But do you really know how they prefer to work? And do you know how they like to communicate with you and the team? I have a colleague who uses WhatsApp with most of his contacts because he knows he'll get an answer, whereas if he writes them an email, he doesn't hear back. So as a team manager, perhaps we need to think about compromising with our team members and finding the communication method and style that works for them so that we can get the best out of them and the relationship that we have with them. So let's just move on and look specifically at some of these cultural pointers. So a couple of things here that perhaps as a manager of a global team we need to think about. Different cultures will see the role of the manager quite differently in terms of how available you need to be, but also how autonomous you expect your team members to be. Do you expect them to get on with things, or are you there kind of feeding them with the work as and when they need? And how accountable should they be and should you be? Time, I think we talk about quite often when we talk about culture, but is time plentiful or is it very scarce? How focused on deadlines will they be? And one of the big things that you hear when you're asking people about virtual teams is the virtual meetings and whether people arrive on time or not. And what does on time mean? For some people, being on time on a virtual meeting might be arriving 10, 15 minutes before. It was great to see this afternoon. I think I logged on half an hour before the session and I saw that there were 5 or 6 people already logged on. They checked that their technology was working and they were ready to go. Whereas, some people perhaps had busy meetings beforehand or were just coming from lunch and were more kind of just in time, which was, fine as well. But there's a very different attitude to time. What motivates your team members? How should you be rewarding different people from different cultures and how do you give them feedback? And then again, the relationship question again and again. Relationships in virtual teams are always important, but there are some parts of the world, some cultures where the relationships perhaps need to be more personal. Things like how much small talk do you make? How much do you need to know about their personal lives? Now, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about trust. This is seen as one of the key determiners in whether virtual teams are successful or not. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the work of David Maister, and he talks about the trust equation. You've seen things like EQ and IQ, and we talk about CQ for cultural intelligence. We now have the TQ as well, the trust quota. And I really like this model because it's simple, but I think it really sums up what most of us at least need to be able to trust our colleagues and our managers. So you can see across the top, there's 3 elements to the equation. We need to see that the other person is credible, and this is really about the words they say and how they show up in meetings, for example. Are they an expert? Can they give us the answers that we need? And then that's coupled with reliability, which is much more about the actions. So do they deliver what they've promised, when they've promised? And then the intimacy part is really around how safe that person makes us feel in a physical sense, but perhaps more importantly in the virtual environment in an emotional sense. Do we know that they will support us? Are we sure that they won't make us feel small in a meeting, for example? They won't ridicule or laugh at us. So those three things, the more we have, the more likely we are to have solid trust. Under the line, the self-orientation, the more we have, the less trust we're likely to have. So this reduces the level of trust. Now, what do we mean by self-orientation? In this context, it's about how in it that person is for themselves. So I might be talking the talk about the team, but actually, if you feel that I'm really focused on my agenda, my needs, and my objectives, then your levels of trust in me are going to diminish because I don't have the wider needs at the forefront of what I'm doing. I'm driven really by my own needs, my own priorities. So that's something, again, I think it's a nice model. It doesn't kind of summarize everything that we need for trust, but it's certainly a good start. And there's just one other model that I'm going to share with you, because I think one of the things that we discover when we do work across cultures is that trust is quite an abstract word. I mean, if I asked you what you need to trust someone, what would you reply? Perhaps either write under this question or perhaps give me a word in the chat function. What do you need to know that you can trust someone, whether it's a manager or a colleague or even someone that reports to you? How can you trust them? Consistency, interesting, thank you. Reliability, competence, okay. Honesty, great, thank you. Just while people are typing, let me share with you another list from another model. He walks his talk. That's nice. So that's really the credibility and the reliability piece we saw in the previous model. This is a list of trust criteria put together by an organization called World Work, who also developed the International Profiler. And they have a very nice tool which looks at how you measure what different team members need to be trusted, but it also measures the gaps in terms of what people feel that they get. And it's those gaps that are interesting and the differences in needs. So somebody in one part of the world, it might be all about honesty and reliability, but for others, it's much more about feeling empowered. You know, if I know that you trust me to do the job, then I'm going to feel more inclined to trust you. For others, it's more about values and feeling aligned in terms of what our goals are and what we're working towards. So the final piece, the central piece, if you remember our diagram that we saw early on in the webinar, was around processes and protocols. And often when we're talking about multicultural teams, whether they're virtual or face-to-face, we talk about finding a third culture. So it's not my way as the team manager, and it's not your way, but it's a new way of doing things. And it's so important that these are named and shared very early in the life span of the team, that you almost have rules that you all agree to bind by. I worked with a client once where they actually wrote down their rules. Everyone had a copy and they signed that they agreed to live by those rules. And I think it's engaging people with the rules, making sure they're generated from team members rather than just prescribed by the manager is very important. So it's creating a sense of we, a sense of engagement that the team can live by. So it can be really basic things about how do we greet each other, you know, how do we address each other in an email, how do we start our weekly catch-up meetings, but also more detailed things about how we share information, how much information we share. One of the big negatives, one of the complaints that we hear often about virtual teams is that people don't share information. They're withholding information or they're secretive about their part of the project. So how much do we share and where do we share that information. And the earlier and the more transparent this is, the more effective it's likely to be, and the less likely you are to find that conflict comes up later. What can be quite nice is to actually create a team charter. Now, I don't know any of you who already work in virtual teams. Do any of you have a team charter already? If you put your hand up, someone's typing. So no. It seems perhaps a little bit like going back to school to create a document for the team, but I've certainly heard some great case studies where this has worked very, very well. And the team, when there is a problem, they're able to go back to that charter and say, well, look, this is what we agreed. We need to stick to this. We need to work it out. So you can see on the screen there's a couple of examples of templates. If you Google virtual team charter, you'll find lots and lots of examples. And I think the first part of this brainstorming exercise actually is to agree what goes into your charter. So there are some ideas here from things like, what are your mission and values? How are you going to communicate? What are the roles within the team? Now, obviously there'll be formal roles in terms of who's the team manager, but it's quite nice perhaps to have a timekeeper, somebody who calls, who defends the charter. So if on a virtual meeting someone isn't playing by the rules, there is a nominated person who is able to call time on breaking the rules. But I think it's the great benefit of doing this is that each charter is unique and each team develops its own way of working with this kind of document. So I think it's definitely something to think about and perhaps experiment with your own teams. Now I'm conscious of time. I realise that we're kind of coming to the end of the hour, and we do just have a quick summary. I would love to be able to spend a lot longer talking about this topic, but this is very much an introduction, and obviously we can run more in-depth sessions around virtual communication, some of the management techniques, but I'd just like to leave you with a few key tips for you to take away. So I think it's clear that I've stressed how important it is to build relationships, and part of that is asking questions, being curious about the people you're working with and getting to know them on a personal level. For me, this is crucial, this element of working with your sub-teams, making sure that there isn't a sense of cliquiness, but that everyone works with everyone and knows each other well. Creating a team charter, that's something to take away perhaps and have a look at and do a little bit more research. Then as a team manager, being ready to adapt your usual style and perhaps in different ways for different team members. So not necessarily always thinking that my way is the right way, but understanding the preferences of your team members. Crucial again, address problems quickly. Conflict rearing its head, nip it in the bud. Make sure that it's addressed transparently and early. And knowing your technology perhaps is a good one to leave you with. So that's kind of it from me. I think Faiza's going to come back and we can open it up for questions if anyone has anything they'd like to ask us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathy, for a great session. I think there are a lot of useful insights and definitely things that people can start to apply to their day to day if they are working in a virtual environment that should hopefully help improve. It's those little things of like, do you know if someone's a morning person or not? That can make all the difference as to whether you send an email at 9 a.m. or noon. So, yes, great things. Any questions from anybody? Feel free to type them into the chat box. A question that I wanted to ask is, one of the things we mentioned at the start of this was being able to talk about virtual teams in a virtual environment and seeing it live in action. Do you have any advice about picking the right type of technology that might work for your team and ensuring that that can help? Because oftentimes tech can be as much of a stumbling block as the existing challenges as well of being in a virtual team.
Absolutely. And I think one crucial piece of advice is to choose few types of technology and use them well, learn them well, rather than playing around with half a dozen different types. I know for meetings, you could, use GoToMeeting, Zoom, Skype, choose the one you want to use, and then make sure everyone's trained and knows how to use it rather than playing around with different methods. Um, there's also a lot of software packages now available for joint project management. And again, I think the important thing is it doesn't really matter which one you use. The important thing is to be clear about what you are using and what you're not. And again, coming back to my point about sub teams, make sure that everyone is in the same technology rather than, oh, well, in this part of the team we use this method, but in another part we use a completely different package. Does that? I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, Pfizer, but
No, it does, and I think also I've found that getting buy-in from everyone to use the technology is important as well,
yeah,
and ensuring that everybody does. I think you'd mentioned it earlier as well that especially with sub teams and things, you can't have
yeah,
some groups playing outside of the rules, otherwise it makes it hard for everyone
absolutely,
involved.
absolutely. And I think
Just
sometimes it's really simple things. I ran some longer virtual management training courses with a US headquartered company a couple of years ago, and we were talking about virtual meetings and using the webcam. And they were like, no, no, we never use the webcam. So I kind of said, well, do you have webcams? And the technology guy was in the meeting, so he jumped in. Yes, every computer has a webcam. So why don't you use them? Oh, well, we don't really like to. And I was running the training, so I kind of said, well, is it useful for me to have my webcam on, or shall I turn it off? No, 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 we really like to see you. It really helps us to stay engaged. Well, go figure with your meetings, turn the webcams on. And it's such a simple thing, you don't need to invest in a training program to tell you that, but sometimes the simple things get forgotten.
definitely. There was one other question you had mentioned earlier about trust,
Mm.
and trust is definitely a big component of when you're working in virtual teams. Do you have any further thoughts on sort of how to generate trust between team members if you never get the opportunity to meet with them face to face?
Specifically not between you and the team members, but between your team members.
Yes.
The latter.
Yep, the
Yeah.
latter.
Yeah. I think there's a number of things one can do. Um, some of these style type questionnaires can be really helpful for understanding what makes the other person tick. So if I know, for example, that for you, we work quite closely together, and if I understand that for you, deadlines are the most important thing, and I realize that I've missed a couple of internal deadlines, then that's going to make you lose trust. So if we know as a starting point what each other need, but I think the other thing is giving people opportunities to work more closely together. Um, and I guess the third thing is how it figures in your team charter. So if you're saying this is the way we behave, this is the way we communicate, are people living by that charter? So actually calling people perhaps when they're not following those team rules as such.
Thank you. I think time together. So we're just going to, if anybody does have any questions, feel free to email it to us, and we will be following up with a recording of the webinar in any case and can share any answers to questions there. Thank you all once again for joining us today. This was the last of our webinar series for 2016. So thank you to everyone who's joined us for either this session or many of them. We've enjoyed having you. We will be announcing next year's schedule soon, and we'll actually be surveying you as well to get your thoughts in terms of some topics that you might be interested in hearing about. In terms of what's next for us, we do have some public courses taking place at our center here in London for those based in the UK. Feel free to join us if you're interested. We've got a working across cultures session and a facilitating international meetings. But otherwise, there's not much else to say beyond have a great rest of 2016, everyone, and a wonderful holiday season. And we shall see you in 2017.
Thanks from me as well, and apologies for my voice. It doesn't, those of you who've been on other webinars know I don't normally sound quite like this, so apologies for the poor sound quality today, but hopefully you're able to follow okay. Thank you, and we'll see you all soon.